Hello and welcome. Today we're taking a journey back to 19th century Bengal, which was, let me tell you, an absolute hotbed of revolutionary ideas. We're going to trace this incredible evolution of Hindu reform movements, following a chain of thinkers who really did change the spiritual and social landscape of India forever. So let's dive in. So here's our roadmap. We're going to kick things off with the pioneering Brahmo Samaj and see how its own success actually led to some major splits. Then, we'll meet the mystic Ramakrishna, who came along with this powerful new way of synthesizing ideas. From there, we'll see how his most famous disciple, the one and only Swami Vivekananda, took those teachings and launched a truly global mission. And then, of course, we'll wrap it all up and point you to where you can learn even more.
The one big question that's really driving our whole story today is this. In an era of massive social, political, and intellectual change, how does one of the world's oldest religious traditions grapple with modernity? How does it redefine itself from the inside out?
Okay, so our story begins with the first big wave of organized reform. This is the movement that really set the stage for everything that came after it, the Brahmo Samaj.
The whole thing really started with a man named Ram Mohan Roy. He founded what he called the Brahmo Sabha, basically an assembly for people who believed in the Upanishadic idea of one single God. But it was Debendranath Tagore, the father of the famous poet Rabindranath, who really gave it structure. He's the one who turned the Sabha into the Brahmo Samaj and brought in things like formal initiations, making it feel almost like a new, distinct religion.
But make no mistake, the Brahmo Samaj was way more than just a theological movement. It was a serious powerhouse for social change. It was out there championing women's equality, pushing for education, and trying to get rid of rituals it saw as harmful. And intellectually, its big goal was a return to the philosophical roots of Vedanta.
But, when you have a movement with this much energy, it's not going to stay the same for long. That internal push for radical change soon started creating friction, conflicts, and eventually some major splits. Let's get into how that all went down.
So the person who really came in and shook things up was this brilliant, super charismatic speaker named Keshab Chandra Sen. He joined the Samaj in 1859 and just completely re-energized the whole thing. He attracted huge crowds with his powerful speeches and, frankly, his magnetic personality.
But all this new, radical energy, it created a pretty serious rift with the older members. The first big split happens in 1866, when Sen and his followers break off. Then, about 12 years later, a second, even more bitter split happens. And this one was sparked by a huge controversy, when Sen, who had been a loud voice against child marriage, arranged for his own underage daughter to marry a Maharaja.
So what were these radical ideas that caused that first split? Well, Sen's group was pushing for changes that were, for the time, absolutely revolutionary. They wanted members to give up the sacred thread worn by Brahmins. They wanted women to be allowed to participate fully in religious services. And maybe the biggest one of all, they wanted to permit inter-caste marriage. These weren't small tweaks. This was a direct challenge to the whole social hierarchy. Now, while the Brahmo Samaj was caught up in all these debates about social reform and theology, a completely different kind of spiritual force was quietly emerging from a temple garden just outside Calcutta. And this brings us to the mystic Ramakrishna, who offered a path not of reform, but of deep personal synthesis.
Ramakrishna's core philosophy was both incredibly simple and, at the same time, profoundly radical. He basically taught that all religions, they're just different roads leading to the exact same destination. He didn't see them as partially true. No, he believed that every single religion, in its own way, was a complete and valid path to God.
And this analogy he used just explains it perfectly. It's so brilliant. He used these simple, everyday examples to talk about these huge truths. It doesn't really matter how you get to the roof, right? All that matters is that you get there. For him, all the doctrines and dogmas that kept religions apart, they were just different kinds of ladders, and they all led to the same place.
The contrast between these two movements is just so clear. On one hand, you have the Brahmo Samaj, very intellectual, very Western-oriented, and really focused on social reform and debate. And then you have Ramakrishna's path, which was all about direct spiritual realization, mixing all kinds of ideas, and having this deep distrust for what he called just bookishness. So, Ramakrishna was the mystic, right? The source of this incredible spiritual energy. But it was his star disciple, a young, super rational, and at first even atheistic man named Narendranath Datta, who would take that energy and channel it into a global mission. And he would become known to the world, of course, as Swami Vivekananda.
And let me tell you, Vivekananda was an absolute firebrand.
This quote just cuts right to the heart of everything he was about. He saw education and privilege not as some personal right, but as a deep, profound responsibility to everyone else. To him, if you ignored the suffering of the masses, you were nothing short of a traitor.
And these weren't just powerful words. He backed them up with a concrete social program that was decades ahead of its time. He called for the complete abolition of caste and untouchability, for mass education for everyone, for the full emancipation of women, and for the working classes to get their fair share of the nation's wealth.
Vivekananda's genius was in bridging that gap between high philosophy and real-world action. He called his idea practical Vedanta. And the concept was simple. Take the lofty idea from Vedanta that God is present in every single being and apply it directly, practically to the world. So for him, serving humanity, especially the poor, wasn't just charity. It was the highest form of worship there is.
And it's because of this unwavering focus on social and economic justice that he's often been called India's first socialist. His vision went so far beyond just individual salvation. He was calling for the collective liberation of an entire society from poverty and injustice. His goal was a truly classless and casteless nation. Vivekananda had absolutely zero patience for hypocrisy or empty rituals. And this quote is one of his sharpest critiques. He's attacking a religion that's obsessed with rules about purity while millions of people are suffering. For him, real holiness wasn't about not touching people, it was about serving them.
So, we've followed this incredible evolution of ideas, from intellectual reform to this mystical synthesis, and finally to a full-blown revolutionary call for social action. Let's just quickly pull it all together and recap the main points.
So what's the big takeaway here? The Brahmo Samaj got the ball rolling on social reform, but eventually fractured under the weight of its own radicalism. Ramakrishna then came in and offered this unifying spiritual vision that went beyond dogma. And finally, Swami Vivekananda took that vision and forged it into practical Vedanta, this powerful ideology of service and social justice that would go on to directly inspire India's freedom fighters.
If this has sparked your curiosity and you want to dive deeper, here are 3 fantastic places to start. To really hear Ramakrishna's own voice, check out the Gospels of Sri Ramakrishna. To see Vivekananda's incredible impact on the world stage, look up his famous 1893 speech in Chicago. And to understand the lasting legacy, dig into how these ideas fueled India's independence movement. And we'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. Vivekananda often said his goal was a man-making religion, a philosophy designed to build strong, compassionate, and self-reliant human beings. And that raises a really powerful question for our own time, doesn't it? If that was the goal back then, what does a philosophy dedicated to building better humans actually look like for our world today?